Okay, well, welcome everyone, and thank you for coming to the Library of Congress this afternoon. And our special thanks to His Excellency Ambassador Batbayar and the Embassy of Mongolia and the Mongolian Cultural Center for bringing the annual Mongolian Studies Conference to the library again for this year's keynote talk. I'm Susan Meinheit, Tibetan and Mongolian specialist in the library's Asian division. So now it is my pleasure to introduce Jessalyn Zoom, Acting Chief of Asian Division.
Susan told me watch the steps, so. All right. Good afternoon, distinguished guests and esteemed colleagues. I'm Jessalyn Zoom, Acting Chief of the Asian Division. It is really a great honor to welcome all of you to the keynote program of the 17th Mongolian Studies Conference here at the Library of Congress. I wanted to give a shout out to my Asian Division colleagues. I know several of you are here, but I'll just name two, Susan Meinheit and Tian Dong, my beloved Asian Division colleagues, as well as our colleagues at the Special Events Office for their meticulous and tireless effort in making today's event possible. A little bit about our Asian Division. The Asian Division proudly houses over 4 million physical items in 200 or more than 200 languages and dialects from across Asia. The division offers public access and expert reference services through its reading room right here in this building. In addition, we provide a wealth of digital resources, including electronic resource subscriptions, ebooks, digitized materials, as well as curated web archives. Everything is freely available online to researchers around the world. The library's Asian Division's Mongolian collection is one of the premier collections in North America. Thanks to the dedicated staff and the librarians like Susan, our Mongolian collections continue to gain recognition among the research community and the general public. So we hope you will enjoy visiting the reading room after the session. Want to say a little bit, even though I'm not an expert, but I'm so excited and looking forward to today's keynote program. Today's keynote will highlight the remarkable work of Dr. Simon Wicke-Smith, specifically his research and translations of Denzong Rawa, Denzong Rawa's poetry, published previously in Perfect Qualities, the collected poems of Denzong Rawa. Dr. Wicke-Smith will delve into Denzong Rawa's enduring influence on Mongolian culture, exploring how his poetry continues to resonate with people today, and his pioneering contributions to education in Inner Asia. We are looking forward to Dr. Simon Wicke-Smith's keynote presentations and deepening our appreciation of Denzong Rawa's contribution to modern Mongolian culture. I now hand it over to Susan, who will introduce our distinguished keynote speaker, Dr. Simon Wicke-Smith.
Our keynote speaker today is Simon Wicke-Smith. Simon is a translator and scholar of Mongolian literature. His work focuses on the period of the Soviet influence and on his life and the life and legacy of the famous 19th century Mongolian monk poet Danzan Vravja, the fifth Gobi Noyan Hutuk, or Lama of the Gobi. Simon holds a BA with honors from King's College London University, 1990, a master's degree from the University of Washington, Seattle in 2010, and a PhD from the University of Washington, Seattle in 2012. Currently, he is an assistant teaching professor in the writing program at Rutgers University, where he is also affiliated with the Department of Asian Languages and Literatures and the South Asian Studies program. His talk today is The Poetry and Perfect Qualities of Danzan Ravja, the Wild Saint of the Gobi. Please welcome Simon Wickensmith.
Thank you. And thank you, Jessalyn, and thank you, Susan. I'm rather loath to repeat everything that they've said, but I would like very much to thank the Library of Congress and the Mongolian Cultural Center and the ambassador for their invitation to give this keynote speech, and also all the individuals who have made this possible at the Library of Congress. So it's very nice to be here, and thank you everyone for coming. So what you see here is a very famous, at least famous in Mongolia, picture, not of course from the 19th century when Danzan Ravja was alive, but it's a kind of portrait by a Mongolian painter called Senge Sokyo that was completed in 1978. And I think this is probably a kind of perfect image of Danzan Ravja during the, in the beginning to be the waning years of the Soviet influence. So he's a kind of monk figure with a lot of books around him to give him the impression that he was maybe more of a scholar or a poet than a real Dharma practitioner, a real Buddhist practitioner. But as I hope to show, this kind of image belies what we should probably understand better about Danzan Ravja. So here is our overview. Oh no, this is not working. Can someone? Oh no, I have to use this one, don't I? Sorry. I will get used to this by the end of the talk. So this is a very brief overview of my presentation. I'm going to give a brief biography. Of course, many of the Mongolians here may very well know some of this, but there's a brief biography, and then I'm going to talk very briefly also about Danzan Ravja's poetry, which is not only in Mongolian but also in Tibetan. And then I'm going to talk about the central aspects of his Buddhist teaching, because although, as I'm going to probably mention quite a lot, he is very well known as I mean, he called himself a drunkard, and he obviously enjoyed sex and drink and other things that monks are not generally known for enjoying. He was also an extremely, clearly an extremely adept and devoted practitioner. And he has very clear, direct teaching about based on Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist thought, which obviously resonated very deeply with his audiences. And then I'm going to end with a to-do list for anyone who would like to work on Danzan Ravja. So, a brief biography. Yeah, I've remembered this time. Sorry, this is a little bit cramped because I kept adding lines to it without thinking that this was going to have to be read at a distance. but there are a few things that I want to point out. So the numbers in brackets are how old he was at the time. So he was born in 1803 in the eastern Gobi, near to the town Sainchand. And he was recognized as the rebirth of the fourth Noyan Hutukt. But because of the Manchu tried to ban the recognition of reincarnations, and so this was kind of undercover recognition. Then at the age of 10, he writes his first poem, Homust, or Homusta Tingri. And then in 1812, he met the Bogdgegen, Jetson Dampa Hutukt, who gives him the monastic name Olufsen Dansan Ravsha. The name Olufsen Dansan Ravsha is a Tibetan, Mongolized Tibetan, Lobsang Tenzin Rabje, meaning something like a great exposition of the teachings and a pure mind. So this sets him up for a good life. What is really important is that at the age of 14, in 1817, he's studying the poetry of Rongpo Khalden Jamso, who's a Tibetan, very important, I think he was Jonangpa, poet and practitioner, a Tibetan, who wrote a lot of poems, a lot of poetry, that we generally call these songs of experience. If anyone's heard of Milarepa, he was in the same kind of poetic region as Milarepa and as Dansan Ravsha would later be. So this character, Rongpo Khalden Jamso, was a very important influence on Dansan Ravsha. Then in 1820, he commissioned his main monastery at Khamrin Hit. And then 3 years later, he meets his main spiritual teacher, Yeshe Tenzin, Yeshe Tempa Gyaltsen, the third Changcha Hutukt, who was based in Beijing. Then he adapts this Tibetan novel into what became one of his most important texts, the Saran Khokho, the Moon Cuckoo, that became a multi-day extravaganza of drama in the Gobi. Dansan Ravsha would, he wrote the play, he made a lot of the clothes and designed a lot of the clothes and the scenes, the scenery, and he really orchestrated the performances in the Gobi of this really big, multi-dimensional drama. He studies tsam, dancing, and theatre in Alsha. And then in 1840, he writes his most famous poem, Ulam Jin Chenar, or Perfect Qualities, which was originally called Tavan Takhil, or five offerings. And this is obviously a Buddhist idea of the 5 offerings, of the sense pleasures. And this is a poem that became a long song, Otindu, later, and became a very popular folk song. And then in 1853, towards the end of his life, although he didn't know it, he brought his disciples to Shambhala, which was an area close to Khamrin Hit, and predicted his death. And he said, in the future, I will return here. and you can meet me here, okay? And so we already get the feeling of him not only as their teacher right now, but also as a teacher, kind of everlasting teacher, right? So he's already beginning to associate himself with the time, the space beyond life and death, but in a very much more deep and more meaningful, spiritual way. And then he dies. He might have been murdered by the Manchu because he was very controversial, and also because he was very popular. And the Manchu wanted to be more popular than him, so they killed him, possibly. Right? So, Danzan Ravsha wrote poems both in Tibetan and Mongolian. He never went to Tibet, but he studied Tibetan, obviously. That was the lingua franca, or the lingua tibetica of Tibetan Mongolian Buddhism, even in Mongolia during the 19th century. And so what we can say about his poems in Tibetan and Mongolian is that his Mongolian poetry, as one might imagine, was directed much more towards the lay people that he was talking to and who lived around him. So this was Buddhism communicated through the ideas of horses, livestock herding, love, and other kind of just regular experiences. But the ideas were maybe framed more in these ideas in order to communicate directly with the people that he was speaking with, and who came in their, hundreds and thousands, maybe even thousands, who came to hear him talk and to receive his blessing and to receive his teaching, right? So monks and lay people would come. So in Mongolian, this was the broad, the broad audience to whom he was talking. His Tibetan poetry was directed rather towards monastics, because they were the ones who knew Tibetan, right? Who could read Tibetan. Maybe they couldn't actually read Mongolian, but they could read Tibetan. And possibly to a broader Tibetan audience, because if you write in Tibetan and you live primarily among Mongolians who maybe can't even read and write Mongolian, who are you writing for? Maybe then he was writing for Tibetans. Maybe he had a sense that his poetry may be interesting if it went to Tibet, right? Or to maybe other Buddhist communities in Mongolia, at least, right? So he was writing for a potential audience, very clearly, in Tibetan. And this was more focused on formal Buddhist philosophy and practice. It's not, in a way, it's not so much fun. It's intellectually, for me, it's interesting. And maybe for many of us, it would be interesting. But it doesn't talk to everyone. It talks to people who already have some background in or interest in Tibetan Buddhism as a practice, right? So yeah, both display a similar sense of humor. The Tibetan ones do have humor, both sardonic and sarcastic. He's very, very harsh when he doesn't like something. And he's very, very funny too. Directness of theme and language, a complete disinterest in the sensibilities of the audience. So he will just say what he wants to say. Self-deprecation and a desire to encourage faith in the Guru and a diligence in practice, right? Whether or not he is identified as the Guru or someone might come to him and listen to his talk and go away and have a renewed sense of devotion to their guru. Okay. So, I have 4. Yes. So, back to this. So I have 4 subjects that I think are the central ideas of his teaching. Firstly, the world is corrupt. Secondly, everything is a dream. Thirdly, the Guru is the refuge. And fourthly, let us meet together in Shambhala. Okay? Shambhala being, I'll talk about it in a moment, but Shambhala is not only the physical place that I mentioned in Mongolia, but also the conceptual Pure Land. There. The world is corrupt, or maybe not. So what I'm going to do is just go very briefly through these ideas, and then I'm going to show you a representative poem. So we have to ask ourselves, was he a misanthrope, or was this a skillful use of satire and a pointed teaching strategy? I think he wasn't a misanthrope. He had a lot of fun. He enjoyed his drink. He enjoyed having sex. And he was a very funny man. I mean, his poetry is funny sometimes. I think he had a lot of fun. So no, I don't think he was a misanthrope. It was a way of teaching. And he asks us to observe the nature of the world and to show that that makes us think about our own lives and particularly our attachments and preferences. So the idea that the world is very, very easy if you just give up liking and disliking, right? And then he asks us to observe these attachments and preferences in order to look at our own minds, how we attach to stuff and are repelled by other things, and how actually that relationship doesn't make us happy. And so to observe our own minds in the fundament of spiritual, as the fundament of spiritual practice. So his constant message is that we need to observe our mind. So here is a poem. This is one of his famous poems, most famous poems. He wrote this on his deathbed, so he was probably a little bit jaded already, having been poisoned possibly by the Manchu. So there's a lot of text, and no one likes reading huge amounts of text, right? But so these red lines, if you can see, I'll just read them for those right at the back. So he says, the world is like a toothless, elegant young woman. So a weird combination, right? Who amazes with her poetic poesy, right? So there's this idea that we're kind of enthralled and yet also repulsed. And then he says, encountering a bodhisattva, the world is a flatterer. So when the world meets a bodhisattva, they flatter them. But once they're across the threshold, the world becomes a slanderer. Okay. He's not really sold on the world. And all the way through Mr. World's Way, Yatansen Jam, we find this whole constant idea that the world is false, deceptive, not something that you should be involved with. You should run away from the world at every opportunity. But that doesn't mean to say you should become a monk. He is always saying, you can find perfection, you can find enlightenment in this world by reducing your attachments and reducing the things that you don't want, right? So getting rid of preference. The next idea, everything is like a dream. This, of course, comes from the Buddhist canonical texts. Everything is like a soap bubble, a dream, a magic illusion. And so the more we look at the movement of our mind, the changes of our mind, we realize that nothing actually remains, that everything changes and everything is indeed like a dream. And so this destabilizes our attachment and our preferences, our desires, our wish to move away from that which we don't like. And he refers to, and he asks us to call the apparent solidity of these experiences into question. Are they true? Are they real? Right? This is what his constant idea is, that we should be checking this kind of thing out all the time. And so while undertaking this exploration, we need a refuge to give us the protection and security. Spoiler, that protection is the Guru, which is the subject of the next section. But everything is like a dream. Here is a poem. Even smaller. This is absurd. I'm sorry. Let me read the red lines. If anybody wants a copy of this translation, I can send it to you. I can also send you the original texts if you read Tibetan and or Mongolian, okay? So this, interestingly, is from a Tibetan text. The others are all from Mongolian. So in a way, I hope you can see a slight difference in the discourse in this Tibetan poem. So the body is like the form of a guest. Until when it will remain is uncertain. A friend is like a beautiful dream. Powerless to be their friend for long, you will separate. Worldly pleasure is like an illusory joy. Once savored, it's forgotten and left behind. Right? So this is much less kind of dramatic and much more, in a way, doctrinally focused. But this idea runs through through much of the Mongolian poems too, that the world is not real, that our experiences are not real, right? That the world is like a dream, like a soap bubble. And so, yes, the Guru is the refuge. So for many people, Danzan Ravjö obviously was their guru, their teacher, their spiritual teacher. And he was super popular and very, very influential in the Gobi and also in Mongolia as a whole. But this is the guru in the heart, right? Not the guru that you can touch with your hand. So the guru is the perfect embodiment of the Buddha. And if we place our trust fully in the guru, we have nothing to fear. This particular one was really central to his discourse, because I think living in the Gobi Desert in the 19th century was not easy. It isn't easy even today. So there was a lot of uncertainty. And for those people who came to him, who didn't have education, who didn't have real knowledge, this maybe was something that they could take away, right? If you trust the guru, whether it's Danzan Ravjö or not, you have nothing to fear, right? And then wherever in the physical world the guru might be, they are immanent. That means they're in your heart, right? So you may be in Senchand and the guru may be off in Tibet or on a vacation, but they're with you. They're closer than close. And these three ideas were really central to his teaching. And again, we have unreadable text, but I'll tell you what it says in red. So emptiness and appearance I'll start again. Emptiness and appearance in appearance and emptiness, and appearance and emptiness undifferentiated in the Guru's form. I make obeisance to the Guru's form. May the Guru's form bless me. Right? So emptiness and appearance, the lack of true substance to things, that is the Guru's form. And that's everywhere. This is what he's saying. And then the bottom verse, among the multitudes, may I think of the Guru. Sitting alone, may I think of the Guru. Continually and without respite, may I think of the Guru. May I never be separated from the appearance of the Guru. So, I mean, you can get an idea about how he is teaching this idea of the Guru. This is not a physical Lama whom you bow down to. This is something much, much deeper and much more meaningful for individual practitioners, right? And this is Danzen Ravcha's real theme, right? The world is empty, and only the Guru is real, right? And if you focus on that, there's no fear, no problem. And finally, recognizing all of that, let us meet together. Let us meet together in Shambhala. So Shambhala is the Western paradise in Buddhism, originally in Tibetan texts. There's a whole textology about Shambhala, ruled by the future Buddha Maitreya. But Shambhala is also a power place near to Danzen Ravcha's monastery in Hamrenhid, near Saint Chand. That's the place that he gathered his followers and said, I will go soon, and I will meet you here later. Okay? So this kind of transcendent idea. And so Shambhala is clearly a metaphor for nirvana, an enlightened state, the enlightened state, which comes at the end of the spiritual journey. But it's also physical, so that this place is a transcendent place. For Danzen Ravcha, it's kind of like another dimension. The wardrobe in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, maybe. So at this point in Mongolia, at this moment, this physical place, that was where, for Danzen Ravcha, the physical land and the transcendent state meet. Okay? So it's a very powerful, spiritually profound experience that he is asking, he's asking everyone that's with him to come with him to that point in their practice and the point in Mongolia. Okay. So here is, this is quite a common ending to Danzen Ravcha's poems. He talks a lot about, at the end of his poems, about being happy. Let us be happy together, right? Let us take joy in the Buddha's enlightenment together. Let us enjoy ourselves. Let us feast together. So there is this community spirit, and the idea as a bodhisattva, as someone who refuses to go to nirvana until every being is enlightened, this is very close to Danzan Ravja's theme, that he will come back and bring all his followers with him, and they will all together become enlightened and all together enjoy the fruits of enlightenment. So this red section at the end says, I will make friends in this way during my, in this way. So by behaving in a kind of spiritually coherent way. I will make friends in this way during my vigorous youth. I will meet and talk with this firm mind. Through the blessings of the Dalai Lama, may I be reborn, following Buddha Taranatha to the land of Shambhala. And Buddha Taranatha refers to Jetandampa Khutak, who was supposed to be a reincarnation of the Jonang Paskala Taranatha. So he's using, it's kind of like a very small lineage tree, Tanka, right? He has the Jetandampa Khutak, who's the leader of Buddhists in Mongolia. He has the Dalai Lama, and he has Shambhala. So the whole thing is focused on Shambhala, right? And everybody comes with him. So this, as you can see from the title, Lovely Rangy Brown, this is about a horse. It starts off about a horse, but no, it's not about a horse, because he is actually using this horse. This is my interpretation, but I think it's valid. He's using this image as the horse that takes one along the path to enlightenment. It's like a vehicle that one uses to get to enlightenment. And finally, this is the Danzan Ravja scholars' to-do list. So we are, the Library of Congress, if I may say so, is hopeful to get the complete works of Danzan Ravja in Tibetan, which has now been published by Ganden Monastery in Ulaanbaatar. So hopefully, at some stage, we will be able to do a critical edition plus English translation of the full Mongolian texts in Mongol Bachik, the vertical script, and also in Tibetan, Uchen Tibetan. Hopefully, before I die, that would be nice. A critical edition is an interesting idea. There are not very many versions to really critique, but there are just about enough, and there are different readings. There are some interesting differences along the way, but definitely one complete text with both Tibetan and Mongolian. That would be very cool and very helpful to scholars. A study of the Lujin, or Chud rituals. He wrote 3 Lujin texts. It appears that he was a Lujin practitioner, Chud practitioner. Of course, we can't be 100% certain, but they are really, really interesting texts. And they fit in very much. The Chud ritual, for those who don't know, is really about cutting through the attachment to the physical world and to the mental world. So it's really about transcending all our mundane understanding and thereby getting enlightenment. So obviously, from what I've shown, this is something that is central to Danzan Ravja's teaching, and I think this is why he was keen to kind of refine his understanding, refine these texts, these Lujin or Chud texts. And I'm sure he has had a lot of his monks practicing in the Gobi. He had a number of meditation caves in the rocks near to Hamrin Head, and he would install his students there. And I have this fantasy, may be true, that he got them doing chud and used them as kind of guinea pigs for his chud rituals. He wrote 3, and each of them is really interesting, and that really needs studying, maybe in relation also to the wider chud tradition of Machik Ladrön. So then the study of the influence of Rongpa Khalden Jansel, who was the 18th century poet whose work he really influenced him. I personally would be really interested in pursuing that, because there are whole ideas that are lifted from Rongpa Khalden Jansel and used in a very different way, but a very interesting way, by Danzan Ravjö in some of his Tibetan poems. And also I think there are echoes in the Mongolian. Obviously, he was really influenced by this character. And then finally, a linguistic study. There are stylistic elements of Danzan Ravjö's poems, particularly in Mongolian, that are interesting. Neologisms and kind of grammatical, syntactical quirks. He wrote some poems with repeated first letter, and it seems that he was really quite vexed sometimes as to how actually to keep this structure going. So you have a little bit of strange grammar where he's desperate to get this word at the beginning of the line, but he can't quite do it grammatically, so he kind of plays with the grammar. And also his influences. Who are Danzan Ravjö's influences? It's not 100% certain, apart from Rongpa Khalden Jansel, but also there may be influences from Milarepa, Drukpa Kunluk, and people in the same kind of sphere of craziness as Danzan Ravjö. Anyway, that's it. So, thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, and so this statue is a recent statue that was. It's in Saint-Chand. It's just behind the Danzan Ravjö Museum, and this is probably the most recent and one of the more majestic representations of Danzan Ravjö. So thank you very much. Roving microphones, right? Okay, thank you. So we can go and eat cookies. Oh, right, yeah. Subtle.
So there are many bilingual poems by Danzan Ravjö, right? In Mongolian, both in Mongolian and Tibetan.
Mm-hmm.
So is it possible to identify if he wrote first in Mongolian and translated to Tibetan, or if he first wrote them in Tibetan and translated, or just two different texts simultaneously, like textology study?
Would you like the honest answer or the scholar answer? Both, okay. Well, the honest answer is I have no idea. No, I don't think anybody could have any idea. The scholarly answer, which might also be honest, is that I believe there are yes, I mean, this is really the scholar's answer. I've heard, right? I've heard that there are different versions in Tibetan and Mongolian, but no one has. I actually asked Altan Ochir, and he doesn't know. No one seems really to know, but I think it's a really fantastic question. But I suspect I mean, we would have to look at the origin texts. I mean, there are some texts which seem to have been written by him, right? And also there are some that are written by his secretaries, right? Those were written in Mongolian, presumably, first. But the ones in Tibetan, yeah, I don't know. What would be really good would be to know when they were written, right? And I don't know where, because the Tibetan text that I got from Ganden is a whole bunch of different xylograph texts, right? So it's not a consistent form. So obviously they got them from all over the place and just made a coherent text from these. So we would have to go back to Ganden and find out where they came from, when these xylographs were made, and then see where how people got the texts that the xylographs were made from. I don't know whether it's possible, but we don't know. And Sagan didn't know, and Altenogger didn't know, so presumably Alten Gödel didn't know. So I don't know. But it's a great question, right? Yeah? Yeah?
Yeah, it's fascinating. Do we know how he gained the knowledge of Tibetan, from where and when? Also around that. Sorry. Yeah, so I was just curious about his language learning ability of Tibetan. Obviously, that has a lot to do with his teaching of Buddhism. I'm also curious, just around that time in history, what was it like in Mongolia in terms of the spread of Buddhism and the popularity of the Tibetan as a language? I'm not sure if these are kind of making sense, but yeah, these are the sorts of things.
Yeah.
As I'm combing through his life, this sort of a crossroads, writing in between Tibetan and Mongolian, and his, of course, ultimate influence of the Mongolian culture.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I have to say that I don't have any explicit answers, but what I think is probably true is that he learned because he was recognized as a Trulku, a Khutukt, a reincarnate Lama, and so he was educated. He was educated in Tibetan. So, like I was educated in Latin, right? In England, we learn Latin. So, I can basically read a little bit of Latin. But the difference is that every day he was reading these texts, right? So he would have learned reading to an extremely high level. Whether he spoke Tibetan, who knows? He didn't go to Tibet. But maybe they spoke Tibetan. Maybe there was sort of oral Tibetan classes that they were forced to suffer through, because many people went to Tibet. Many monks went to Tibet, particularly the more senior ones or the more capable ones, right? So, he was obviously a rather impressive young man. He would have been down to go to Tibet. He just never went for whatever reason. Maybe he knew Tibetan to speak, but he definitely knew it to write. His Tibetan is really beautiful, but it's a bit strange sometimes. But it shows kind of a freedom, like for someone who isn't really forced into the straitjacket of formal grammar, right? And so he plays around a little bit, but it's good Tibetan. He uses quite sophisticated language, like he does in Mongolian. It's almost as though, for reading, he's kind of at the same level because he had to read Tibetan texts all the time, right? About how Tibetan was studied in Mongolia at the time, I don't know very much. I'm sure there are people here who know 100 times more than I do, whom you could ask. But I'm not going to speculate. But I would imagine that, you know, like Danzan Ravsha, good students would have known. I mean, everybody in a monastery would know Tibetan to some extent, right? Like, I mean, to continue the Latin analogy, if you become a Catholic monk, you learn Tibetan. Even if you don't even finish high school, you have to learn, not Tibetan, you have to learn Latin, right? So it's the same principle. Everybody, all the monks and the nuns knew Tibetan because they had to. They were reading Tibetan texts all day. But their acuity and their fluidity with actually composing in Tibetan, there may not have been that many who were very good, right? But yeah, I mean, if you're interested, there are people in this room who can help you, I'm sure, with that. Yeah. Yes.
In addition to the Moon Cuckoo, were there other plays that Danzan Ravsha wrote and performed, or was that the only, you know, he built that theater to perform in?
Right.
But was that the only play that we know of, or were there others that were performed?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, this theatre that he constructed, this traveling theatre troupe that he organized, this was a really big deal in the Gobi. And, you know, people would go and hang out for days and days and days to enjoy the play. And the Moon Cuckoo, I think, ran for almost a month. But yeah, there were others. I can't remember what they were now. I could find out for you. But I don't know how much more he actually wrote himself. They may have been adaptations of Indic or local Mongolian stories. But it was very popular, and his muse, consort, best friend, Dadishara, she was obviously a great singer and extremely creative, and she was in charge of the choreography and the costumes. And Danzan Ravsha was in charge of the scenery. And yeah, they would travel around the Gobi doing performances. And yeah, I think at least once a year they would perform the Moon Cuckoo, and they would also perform other plays which we may well have texts for, but I'm not 100% sure. Yeah. Rather poor quality answers, I'm afraid. Rather poor quality answers. Not very. These are the wrong questions. Okay. Any more questions?
Thank you very much for the interesting presentation. I have one question. So, what is the main teaching, or how do you see what we should learn from his poem, Perfect Qualities?
Of Perfect Qualities?
Yeah.
Yes. It's a shame. It's a shame we don't have a text. So, yeah, perfect qualities. Perfect qualities are this famous 5 stanzas that used to be, it was originally called Tavan Tahil, or the 5 offerings. The story, so this could be a whole lecture in itself. The original text was clearly about the sense pleasures of sight, sound, touch, scent, and smell. And so obviously, the original idea, the Buddhist idea, is that we should take joy. We should take joy in our senses while recognizing that they are not true, right? That we say everything is like a dream, right? So when I look at my beautiful wife, I see a person, but if I attach to that beauty, if I attach to that heart, when it disappears, then there is sadness. But if I just accept it, then it becomes something that comes and goes, and that coming and going is part of the teaching, right? But if we take it as a love song, which many people do, then it's really a love song. It's about the vision of his consort, his lover, maybe Dadishara, and the full sensory overload of him coming into contact with this woman whom he loved, her beauty, the scent, the touch of her skin, and the feelings that it produced in him. This is the folk song version, right? So you have 2 options. Do you have Tavan Tahil, which is a Buddhist teaching, or do you have Ulam Jinchanar, which is a love song? Or maybe you have them both together, in the sense of my example. You know, you fall in love with someone, but do you let that just drag you away, or do you remain with a clear mind while fully enjoying the pleasures of the senses? You know, it's that kind of complex teaching. I mean, you know, I'm sure Danton Ravsha could talk to us for like 2 or 3 hours about the Buddhist philosophy behind that. But that's what I understand. Do you have a sense? Yeah, you feel the same kind of thing, right? Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
So I'm a lawyer, right?
Yeah.
I remember being in high school and reading about Sarang Fufu play and Ushimjin Chanar poem, and it was like mandatory school requirement that we had to read, and it amazes me, like you, a foreigner, translating, analyzing all of his work. So I'm curious about what made you got into it in the first place. Like, what's your creative process or calling? Why do you care about him?
It's a good question. Why do I care? Well, in my 20s, I was a Buddhist monk, so that's where I learned Tibetan. But at the same time as I learned Tibetan, I also learned Mongolian through the Bichik, because I was really interested in how Buddhism had got from Tibet to Mongolia. So that's where it comes from. Why do I care about Danzan Ravsha? It's very, very odd. So I was working on the 6th Dalai Lama, Tsangyen Gyatso, whose poetry is also kind of wacky and whose life story is equally strange, even more strange maybe than Danzan Ravsha's. And I read about Danzan Ravsha in a secondary text. There was this crazy monk in the early 19th century in Mongolia who wrote love stories and who drank, who was considered a drunkard and a womanizer. And of course my antenna went up and I was very excited by this. And so I wrote I found a Mongolian at Indiana. I mean, there are lots of Mongolian scholars at Indiana, right? In the 90s this was. And his name was Munk Amgalan. Some of you may know Munk Amgalan. He was a Muis too. And I wrote to him, and just randomly, this guy from England wrote to this Mongolian in Bloomington and asked him about Danzan Ravsha. And Munk Amgalan, one of the kindest things that anyone's ever done for me, he sent me his copy of Danzan Ravsha's collected works, the version of Tsagan, but the second edition. And he said to me, he wrote me a letter, this was before email, he wrote me a letter and said, please scan this, please Xerox this and send it back to me. He didn't know who I was. I could have just taken it. But I Xeroxed it and I sent it back to him. It was a physical copy. And then I Xeroxed it. Yes, it's extraordinarily kind. And and Danzan Ravsha taught me Mongolian because I had learnt Bichik, and in the what's the university library in Oxford called? Bodleian, right? So the Bodleian Library had Charles Borden's dictionary of Mongolian, and I got a reader's card. Every day when I wasn't working, I would go and I would translate this Xerox. And I worked all the way through, like 500 pages. And then I looked at then I got to the end, and I looked at the first poem, and it was execrable. It was dreadful. It was inaccurate. It was ugly. It was horrendous. So I did it again. I went all the way through again. And by the end of that, I had a pretty good knowledge of Mongolian vocabulary and grammar. So Danzan Ravsha is why I can read and translate. So we have him to thank, or him, wherever he is, right? Yeah, so that's, but why do I care? I think it's amazing poetry. And also, as someone who's interested in Buddhism, and as an erstwhile practitioner, I really appreciate his very, very individual take on Buddhism. It's absolutely founded in the teaching of the Buddha, but also absolutely individual. And I get the feeling that he was willing to work with anyone wherever they were. He would not impose himself on them. He would go to them. Where are you? This is where you are. So let's look at it from this point of view, right? So that kind of openness that maybe you can feel from reading the originals, that kind of openness is what really attracts me to Danzan Ravsha. And then the first time I went to Mongolia in 2006, I met Alten Gedel, and I went to Shambhala, and I am so not like a hippie, crazy hippie. But I went to Shambhala, and there was something so profound about that place. And my heart kind of opened. And I thought, well, if this can have this effect on me, then there is something that is very, very meaningful. And I noticed that I was the only, for whatever reason, the only person who had thought to translate his work. So I did it. And so 19 years later, I'm still doing it and still finding out. And it's a tremendous honor and a tremendous, exciting journey with Danzen Ravsha. Yeah. I mean, yeah, like Susan said at the beginning, my focus is Soviet era literature. But compared with one poem by Danzen Ravsha, that's all. It's not important. But there's something about Danzen Ravsha that really touches me. That's why I really care a lot. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming, and I hope that you can come again and make use of the fantastic Mongolian collections here. So thank you. Thank you.